I'm going to go now to Mr. Eliot Engel, the ranking member of this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to throw out a few things and ask you to comment on them. First of all, to continue on Iran, what steps are we taking and will we take to combat Iran's support for terrorism and other malign activities? What are we doing to make sure that Israel will be safe as Iran rearms and continues to arm Hezbollah, which threatens Israel? With Ukraine, Russia is challenging our NATO allies across the continent. I am encouraged by the President's commitment of significant additional resources to the defense of Europe, but I still think we need to do more. NATO needs to permanently station a brigade in Poland and the Baltic states, and every ally needs to get above the 2% requirement for their defense spending. So I am hoping that the Administration will permanently commit more troops to the defense of Europe and press our allies to more adequately share the burden of their defense. I would like to ask you what the Administration thinks will happen next and what we are doing vis-à-vis North Korea. And finally, I want to talk about Pakistan, because I am concerned that Pakistan continues to play a double game, fighting terrorism that has a direct impact inside Pakistan and supporting it in places like India and Afghanistan, where Pakistan believes such a policy furthers its national interests. So what are we doing about that? How does our assistance support or hinder our hope that Pakistan begins to fight all terrorists?
Well, Mr. Ranking Member, let me try to address those as quickly as I can. On Iran, let me just inform everybody here that the IRGC has actually pulled its troops back from Syria. Ayatollah Khamenei pulled a significant number of troops out. Their presence is actually reduced in Syria, number one. Number two, that doesn't mean that they're still not engaged and active in the flow of weapons from Syria through Damascus to Lebanon. We're concerned about that, and that is an ongoing concern. The other thing is that this money, I keep hearing this figure of $100 billion, $150 billion. Iran is not going to get $100 or $150 billion, certainly not in the near term, and that figure is not accurate. It's more, our estimates are somewhere in the vicinity of $50 to $55 billion at some point in time, but it's way below that right now. And in fact, they are complaining about the slowness with which there has been a process of repatriation. So I urge you to go to the intel piece, get the intel briefing on what has happened with the RGC and what is happening with the flow of money. Now, with respect to Iran's behavior in the region, we have been deeply engaged with our GCC friends, and I've had 3 or 4 meetings now with them since last summer when they came to Camp David. Since then, I'm meeting with them again shortly. We've engaged in a major plus-up of our military exercise, military cooperation, military support. We are joining with them in an active effort to push back against other activities. We're part of the coalition that has been supporting the Saudis and the Emiratis and others who've pushed into Yemen to protect Saudi Arabia against the Houthi. And I believe we may even now, as a result of those efforts, find a ripeness in a political process that might be able to help resolve that. On Syria, Iran has come to the table, together with Russia, to agree to 2 communiques in Vienna and a United Nations Security Council resolution outlining a framework for the political resolution of Syria. Now, I'm not here to vouch for the words, but I'm here to say to you there is at least a framework on paper which we are now following with hopes of getting back to the discussion in Geneva in the next week with the support of Iran and Russia. Now, we're going to have to put that to the test. We're not sitting here saying it's going to happen automatically, but if there's going to be a political settlement, the only way to get there is with the agreement and consent of all the parties. All the stakeholders are at the table for the first time. So we're hopeful that we can press that forward and at least come to you with a notion in a matter of months, weeks. They're either serious or they're not. If they're not serious, then we're going to have to be talking with you about whatever Plan B is going to be. But if there's a prayer of holding Syria together, unified as a whole country, without further refugee migration challenges to Europe and challenges to Jordan and Lebanon and the rest of the region, we must pursue some kind of a political process. With respect to Europe, we have engaged in a significant plus-up. As I just mentioned, the budget goes from about 700 million, 700 plus 750 million, up to 3.4 billion in our support for the forward deployment of both troops, rotating support structure, and assistance to Europe. And I won't go into all the details now. Maybe I'll submit it for the record because of the time frame. But I just want to say to you that there is a very robust effort going on the frontline state support and our support for Ukraine, our pushing on Minsk. President Obama has had 3 or 4 conversations with President Putin in the course of the last months from the United Nations meeting on. In every one of them, he spends probably 50% of the time, at least, on the issue of Ukraine and full implementation in Minsk and responsibility for protecting the integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. So we're deeply engaged on those fronts, and I think our support is welcome and very important.
We're going to go now to Eliot and Ross.